The first time I saw the grove, I thought it was diseased. Not rotting exactly, but corrupted. It was late October, the air sharp with the smell of decaying leaves and wood smoke, and I was checking my trap lines along the northern ridge of my property. I've lived my whole 43 years in the shadow of these mountains, and I know these woods like the back of my own hand. Or I thought I did. The maple grove sits in a shallow bowl between two hills, a place where the light gets caught and filtered, turning everything a pale, watery gold in the afternoon. Normally, it's the prettiest spot on my land, but that day, the color was all wrong. The reds of the leaves weren't the usual vibrant, bloody crimson. They were a dark, purplish hue, like a fresh bruise. The yellows were shallow and jaundiced, and the quiet, that was the first thing that truly set my teeth on edge. A woods is never truly hushed. There's always the scramble of a squirrel, the call of a jay, the sigh of the wind through branches. This was a dead, muffled stillness, as if the grove was holding its breath. Even in broad daylight, with the sun directly overhead, the air inside the bowl felt thick and wrong, like breathing through a wet cloth. I stood at the edge of the tree line, my old Remington 870 cradled in the crook of my arm, and just listened. Nothing. My boot crunched on a fallen twig as I took a step forward. The sound was absurdly loud, swallowed almost instantly by the heavy air. I remember feeling a prickle on the back of my neck, the kind you get when you know you're being watched. I scanned the trees, looking for the reflective gleam of eyes, but saw nothing. Just those sickly, bruise-colored leaves and gray, skeletal branches. I'd been a trapper since I was a boy, taught by my grandfather. It's not a glamorous life, but it's an honest one. I know the patterns of the animals, their comings and goings, and I knew that nothing, not a deer, not a rabbit, not even a goddamn bird, would willingly go into that grove. My trap lines, which usually showed plenty of sign, ended abruptly at its border. It was like an invisible fence had been erected, and every creature with sense respected it. Shaking off the feeling, I chalked it up to a long week and an overactive imagination. I turned to leave, deciding to give the grove a wide berth, when something caught my eye. A flicker of movement deep within the trees. It was quick. A shift of shadow that was too tall and too thin to be a deer. My grip tightened on my shotgun. "Hello?" I called out, my voice flat and dead in the stillness. There was no answer, just the same oppressive hush. Then, from the heart of the grove, came a sound. It was a soft, wet crackling, like someone stepped on a pile of rotten fruit, but slower, deliberate. Crack, squelch, pause, crack, squelch. I didn't wait to hear more. I backed away, keeping my eyes on the grove until I was a good 50 yards up the ridge. The feeling of being watched didn't leave me until I was back on my porch, the solid oak door locked behind me. I told myself it was probably a bear, a sick one, maybe, explaining the strange behavior of the wildlife. But I'd never seen a bear move like the shadow had moved. It was unnatural. All of it felt poisoned. That was 3 days ago. I tried to put it out of my mind, focusing on salting the pelts I'd collected and splitting wood for the winter. But yesterday, my dog Gus, a hound mix with more courage than sense, didn't come back for his dinner. Gus never missed a meal. I remember the day I brought him home as a pup, how he'd wolf down his food so fast I worried he'd choke. Then look up at me with those amber eyes like he was asking for seconds. 10 years old now, and he still attacks his bowl like he's been starving for weeks. This morning, I found his tracks leading straight toward the maple grove. They disappeared at the exact same spot where I stopped. There were no tracks leading back out. Even in the harsh morning light, with frost glittering on the grass, the grove looked wrong. The shadows inside it were too deep, too dark for the angle of the sun. The corruption wasn't bound by night and day. It was bound to that place, that bowl of diseased earth. Now, as the sun begins to dip below the hills, casting long, distorted shadows that seem to claw their way toward my house, I'm sitting here with a cold cup of coffee and my shotgun across my knees. I can hear something else, carried on the wind that's finally picked up. It's faint, but unmistakable. It sounds like a dog whining. It sounds exactly like Gus. But Gus never whined. Not once in the 10 years I had him. Even when I accidentally caught his paw in the trunk door, he just looked at me with those patient eyes and waited for me to free him. He was the toughest, most stoic animal I'd ever known. The whining cut through the twilight, a high, pitiful sound that seemed to weave itself between the trees. It was coming from the direction of the grove, no doubt about it. Every instinct told me to run toward it, to find my dog, but the part of my brain that had kept me alive in these woods for 4 decades screamed to stay put. It wasn't just that Gus never whined. It was the quality of the sound. It was too perfect, like a recording of a dog in distress, played back with a slight, unnatural lag that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I stood on the porch for a long time, the shotgun cold and heavy in my hands, listening. The whining would start, rise to a frantic pitch, then stop abruptly, leaving a vacuum that felt even more threatening. After the 3rd cycle, I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't leave him out there, even if it was a trap. I loaded a fresh shell into the chamber, the click echoing in the quiet, and stepped off the porch. I didn't go straight for the grove. That would have been suicide. Instead, I circled wide, keeping to the high ground where the spruce grew thick, their needles muffling my steps. The air had turned cold, carrying the damp, earthy smell of coming frost. From the range, I had a clear view down into the bowl where the maples stood. In the fading light, the bruised, purple leaves were now a deep Venus black, and the hush around them were absolute. The whining had stopped the moment I left the porch. I used my binoculars, scanning the edge of the tree line. Nothing moved, but then I saw them. Tracks. Not Gus's. These were fresh, made in the soft mud of the seep that the spring fed from the hill. They were long and narrow, with a deep, precise impression at the front that split into 2 distinct toes. They looked almost like deer tracks, but wrong. Too elongated, and the stride was enormous, covering ground in a way that suggested a creature walking on 2 legs. The tracks led from the grove, headed toward my house, and then looped back. They had come within 50 yards of my porch before turning around. My blood ran cold. It had been watching me while I was standing there, listening to that fake whining. It had been right there, studying me. I needed to talk to someone. Isolation is a trapper's lot, but this was different. This felt like a siege. The closest neighbor is Old Man Hemlock, who lives a mile down the valley. He's been there even longer than I have. A bitter, weathered relic who claims his family settled this land before the state was a state. I don't like him much. He's got a mean streak wider than the valley. But he knows things about these mountains that no one else remembers. I found him on his rickety porch sharpening a knife on a whetstone. The rhythmic shh, click, was the only sound. He didn't look up as I approached, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his weathered hand gripped the knife handle a little too tight. "Hemlock," I said, my voice rough. He finally glanced at me, his eyes pale and watery in a face like cracked leather. There was something haunting in those eyes, something that hadn't been there the last time I'd seen him. "What do you want?" "Something's wrong up by the maple grove on my land." He stopped sharpening. The sudden stillness was more unnerving than the rhythmic scraping had been. "The bowl?" I nodded. "Yeah, the bowl. The trees, the color's off, and there's something in there. It took my dog." He let out a dry, rattling laugh that turned into a cough. But the laugh was forced, hollow. His knuckles were white where he gripped the whetstone. "Took your dog? Probably a coyote. Or a cat. You're getting spooked, boy." He went back to his knife, but the rhythm was off now. Jerky. Shh, click. It wasn't a coyote. I told him about the corruption in the grove, how it persisted even in daylight, the shadow, the tracks. I didn't mention the whining. That felt too insane to say out loud. When I described the tracks, his hand stilled completely. He looked past me, toward the ridge where my property lay, and I saw genuine fear flicker across his features. "Two-toed?" he asked quietly. "Yeah, like a deer, but not." He was quiet for a long time. The wind picked up, whistling through the gaps in his cabin's logs. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "My grandfather," he said. "He talked about this thing that lived deep in the hollows. A thing that got lonely. It wouldn't kill you straight off. First, it would learn you. It'd watch from the trees, learn your walk, your voice. It'd practice." He looked me dead in the eye, and I saw something break in his expression. "It makes sounds to draw you in. Sounds you want to hear. A baby crying. A friend calling for help. A dog whining." My mouth went dry. "What is it?" He shrugged. A slow, wary movement, but his hands were shaking now. "Don't know if it ever had a name. He just called it the Hollow One. Said it couldn't stand empty spaces. Couldn't abide them. Had to fill them up with something. Usually, it was with you." He pointed his knife toward my land, the blade trembling slightly. "If it's in that grove, you leave it be. You seal up your house and you pray it gets bored. You don't go looking for your dog." I can't just leave Gus.
Gus is gone,
he said, and there was a finality in his voice that felt like a tombstone slamming down. But also something else. A terrible understanding. As if he'd lost something himself.
That thing wearing his sound ain't him. It's just the hollow left behind.
He stood abruptly, almost knocking over his chair.
You need to go. Now. And don't come back here after dark.
There was genuine panic in his voice now, and it infected me. He'd seen this before, known this fear. As I walked away, I heard him calling out behind me, his voice cracked and desperate.
Don't listen to it. Whatever it sounds like, don't listen.
The walk home was the longest mile of my life. Every rustle in the undergrowth sounded like a footstep. Every creak of a branch sounded like a voice. Hemlock's words echoed in my head.
It would learn you.
I thought about the shadow I'd seen, how it had moved. I thought about the tracks circling my house. When I got back, the night was full dark, but even in the starlight, I could see the grove's corruption was spreading. The grass at the edge of my property line was browning, wilting in patches that led like a trail toward my house. Whatever was in that bowl wasn't content to stay there. It was reaching out, claiming more ground. I locked the door and bolted it, something I almost never do. I sat by the window with the shotgun, watching the tree line. The woods were never truly dark. Starlight or moonlight usually gave the snow or the pale bark of the aspens a soft glow. But the maple grove was proof of absolute blackness, a hole cut out of the night. An hour passed, then two. I must have dozed off because the sound jolted me awake. It was a voice. My voice. Hello? It called from the edge of the woods. It was my own tired, strained baritone, perfect in every inflection. Is anyone out there? I think I'm lost. It was me, calling for help. The mimicry was flawless. A cold sweat broke out all over my body. I gripped the shotgun so hard my knuckles ached. The voice came again, closer now. Hello? I can see your light. Please. It was using my own voice to lure me out. Hemlock was right. It was learning. And it was at my door. The voice outside was my own, but frayed at the edges with the panic I hadn't let myself feel yet. Hello? I can see your light. Please. It was perfect, down to the slight catch in my throat I get when I've been breathing in cold air too long. I stayed frozen by the window, the wooden floorboards cold under my socks. My finger rested on the trigger guard of the shotgun, a tremor in my hand I couldn't quite still. Answering it felt like madness, but letting it stay out there, learning, practicing my voice until it could fool anyone, that was a different kind of death. Hemlock's words echoed.
It would learn you.
I made a decision. I couldn't shoot what I couldn't see, and opening the door was suicide, but I had to disrupt it. I had to show it I wasn't an easy mark. I moved to the door, keeping low, and pressing my face against the rough wood near the hinge. I took a deep breath, and then I shouted, my real voice booming in the confined space of the cabin. I know what you are. Get off my land. The hush that followed was immediate and absolute. It was more unnerving than the mimicry. It was a listening quiet. I could feel it out there, just beyond the door, processing. Then, a sound started, low and soft. It wasn't my voice anymore. It was the sound of claws, long and delicate, scratching slowly down the length of the door. A dry, rasping whisper, like bone on wood. It started at the top and dragged all the way down to the bottom. I could picture it standing there, running its fingers, or whatever it had, down the door in a grotesque caress. Then it stopped. I heard footsteps, not trying to be quiet anymore. They were heavy, with the same two-toned gait I'd seen in the mud. But now they crunched on the gravel path leading away from my house. They were headed back toward the maple grove. I waited until the sound faded completely before I let out a breath I'd been holding in. My heart was hammering against my ribs. It had come to my door. It had touched my house. The violation of it made me sick. I spent the rest of the night barricaded in, dozing fitfully in a chair. Every snap of the cooling wood stove made me jump. At first light, I unbarred the door. The morning was crisp and still. The sky a pale, washed-out gray. I half expected to see a mark on the door, but the wood was unblemished. No scratches, no fingerprints on the porch. It was as if it had never been there. But when I stepped off the porch and looked at the gravel, my blood went cold. There, in the damp earth beside the path, was a single, fresh, two-toed track. It was deep, as if it had stood there for a long time, watching. And beside it, pressed into the mud, was something else. A tuft of coarse, gray hair. Gus's hair. I remembered how he'd shed like crazy every spring, leaving tumbleweeds of fur rolling around my cabin. I'd complained about it then, but now I'd give anything to sweep up another pile of his hair. That was it. The grief and rage I'd been suppressing boiled over. It had taken my dog. It was coming to my home. It was taunting me. I wasn't going to wait for it to get bored. I was going to the grove. But first, I had to check on Hemlock. His terror the night before had been real, and something told me he was in as much danger as I was. I loaded the shotgun with buckshot, stuffed extra shells into my coat pockets, and took my grandfather's old hunting knife from its sheath on the mantel. The bone handle was smooth and familiar in my grip. The walk to Hemlock's place was eerily quiet, even for mid-morning. No birds, no squirrels, just the crunch of the frost-brittle grass under my boots. His cabin looked normal from the outside, smoke rising from the chimney, but something was off. His door was standing open, just a crack, and there was no sound of movement from inside. I called out as I approached. "Hemlock, you in there?" No answer. The stillness around his place felt familiar now, the same dead calm that surrounded the grove. I pushed open the door with the barrel of my shotgun. Hemlock was sitting in his chair by the fire, the whetstone in his lap, the knife in his hand. At first glance, he looked like he was just resting, but his eyes were open, staring at nothing, and there was no rise and fall to his chest. On the table beside him was a plate of half-eaten food, still warm. He had been dead less than an hour. There were no marks on him, no sign of violence, but on the floor beside his chair was a small puddle of that black, viscous sap I'd seen weeping from the maples, and the smell, that sweet, coppery rot, hung thick in the air. It had come for him in the night, not to kill, not exactly, to hollow him out, to learn him, and then it had left him behind, empty. I backed out of the cabin, my hands shaking. The grove wasn't just claiming animals now, it was claiming people, and I was next. The woods were unnaturally hushed as I approached the grove. No birds chirped, no squirrels chattered, but unlike the crushing stillness of the past days, this felt expectant, like the entire forest was holding its breath. As I neared the bowl, the familiar dead zone began. The sound faded away completely, replaced by the oppressive, muffled quiet. The air grew still and cold, and the smell hit me, a sweet, cloying odor of decay, like overripe fruit and something else, something metallic like copper. I stopped at the tree line, just as I had the days before. The maples stood in their twisted circle, their leaves that same sickly purple black. But now I could see they weren't just diseased. They were feeding. The ground inside the grove was bare of any undergrowth, covered only in a thick layer of fallen leaves that looked unnaturally dark and wet. Several of the larger trees had deep, vertical splits in their bark, weeping that black sap I'd seen at hemlocks. And then I saw Gus's collar. It was lying in the center of the grove, the bright red nylon a stark slash of color against the dark earth. The brass nameplate glinted in the weak light. The same nameplate I'd had engraved at the feed store when he was just a pup, so proud to have his first real dog. It was just sitting there, clean, as if it had been placed deliberately. I knew it was a trap, a blatant, obvious lure, but seeing that collar, the one I'd buckled around his neck when he was small enough to fit in my lap, broke something in me. I stepped across the threshold into the grove. The change was instantaneous. The temperature dropped 10 degrees. The quiet became absolute, a physical pressure on my eardrums. The sweet, rotten smell was so thick I could taste it at the back of my throat. I took a few steps forward, my boots sinking into the spongy leaf litter. Every sense screamed at me to run. I was halfway to the collar when I heard the sound behind me. A soft, paddling footstep. I spun around, shotgun raised. There was nothing there, just trees, watching. Then, from my left, a whisper. It was my own voice again, but this time it was calm, conversational, the way I sounded when I'm talking to Gus. "It's all right, boy. Come on out." I swung the gun toward the sound. Nothing. A branch snapped to my right. I turned again, my breathing coming in ragged gasps. The grove seemed to be closing in on me, the trees leaning inward. The voice came from directly behind me, so close I could feel a faint disturbance in the air. "I'm lost. I whirled, fingers tightening on the trigger, and saw it. Not all of it, just a glimpse. A flicker of movement between two thick trunks. It was tall, far taller than a man, and impossibly thin. Its skin was the color of bleached bone, and it seemed to blend with the trees, its limbs long and jointed wrong. I didn't see a face, just a suggestion of a head that tilted at an unnatural angle. Then it was gone, melting back into the shadows. But it left something behind. Hanging from a low branch was a small, tattered piece of cloth. I stepped closer, my heart pounding. It was a small strip of red flannel, the same pattern as the shirt Hemlock had been wearing yesterday. There were dark stains on it that looked suspiciously like black sap. A new sound began echoing softly through the grove. It was the rhythmic shh, click, shh, click of a knife being sharpened on a whetstone. Hemlock's sound. It was perfect, down to the slight irregularity when he'd pause to test the blade's edge. And it was coming from multiple directions at once. The sound of Hemlock's whetstone surrounded me, a metallic chorus coming from every shadow space between the trees. Shh, click, shh, click. It was a taunt, a reminder that everything I knew was being consumed and played back at me. The strip of red flannel hung from the branch like a flag of surrender. Hemlock hadn't been lying. He'd been a lesson, a demonstration of what happened when the Hollow One learned you completely. And now it was my turn. I stood my ground, the shotgun stock pressed hard against my shoulder. Panic was a cold fire in my veins, but beneath it was a colder, harder core of fury. That thing had taken my dog. It had killed Hemlock. It had violated my home. It thought it knew me. It thought I was just another hollow to be filled. But Hemlock's words came back to me.
Couldn't stand empty spaces. Had to fill them up with something.
If it needed to fill the silence with sound, needed to fill the hollows with something, what if I gave it nothing? Show yourself, I roared, my voice cracking in the dead air. The whetstone sound stopped. In a hush that followed, I heard a new sound, a soft, wet crunching, the same one I'd heard days ago, but closer now, much closer. It was coming from directly behind the tree where the flannel hung. I didn't wait. I fired. The blast was deafening, a shocking violation of the grove's stillness. The buckshot tore into the trunk, splintering bark and sending shards of wood flying. The crunching sound stopped. For a single, heart-stopping moment, there was nothing. Then, a sound I will hear until the day I die. It was a low, guttural clicking, a sound no animal around here could make. It was a sound of annoyance, of irritation. I had not heard it. I had annoyed it. It stepped out from behind the tree. It was taller than I'd imagined, 7 feet at least, and so thin it seemed to waver like a heat haze. Its skin wasn't bark-colored. It was the color of old bone, stretching taut over a frame of impossible angles. Its legs were reversed like deer's, but its arms were too long, ending in hands with 2 long twig-like fingers and an opposing thumb. It had no face, where a face should have been, was a smooth, pale expanse, broken only by a long, vertical gash that I realized was a mouth, currently smeared with something black and viscous. Sap. It was feeding. But it was what hung from its neck that made my breath catch in my throat. Gus's collar. The red nylon was a garish necklace on the pale thing. It had put it on like a trophy. It tilted its headless head, and from the gash of a mouth, my own voice emerged, calm and measured.
"It's all right, boy. Come on out."
It was repeating what I'd said to Gus 1,000 times when he was hiding under the porch during thunderstorms, when he was reluctant to come back from his explorations. It had learned my life, cataloged every sound I'd ever made around my dog. I fired again, this time aiming center mass. The thing moved with a speed that was pure liquid shadow. It flowed to the side, and the shot peppered the ground where it had been. It didn't run. It just shifted. And then it was closer. It smelled of wet earth and that coppery sweetness, a smell so thick it was a taste. I backpedaled, fumbling for another shell. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped it. The thing watched me, its body making small, twitching adjustments. It was learning my fear, cataloging every tremor, every panicked breath. It took a step forward, its two-toed feet sinking into the spongy ground without a sound. Then another. It was herding me, deeper into the grove. I saw then what I hadn't noticed before. In the very center of the bowl, the earth was not just bare, it was sunken, a shallow impression filled with those dark, wet leaves. And protruding from the leaves were bones. Animal bones, mostly. A deer skull, the long rib cage of a bear, and nearer to the edge, something smaller. A canine jawbone, weathered and old, and next to it, a fresher kill. A rabbit, its fur matted and dark. This was its larder. This was where it brought things. This was where it hollowed them out. It was between me and the way out. I had one shell left in the chamber. My knife was in my hand, a pathetic sliver of steel against this thing. Hemlock's words came back to me. An idea, desperate and insane, formed in my mind. It learned sounds. It needed to fill the quiet with something familiar, something it could understand and use. What if I gave it nothing to learn? What if I became an empty space it couldn't tolerate? As it took another gliding step toward me, I did the hardest thing I've ever done. I stopped. I lowered the shotgun. I forced my breathing to slow. I forced the terror down into a tight, hard ball in my gut. I looked past it, at the trees beyond the grove. I made my mind a blank, white wall. I became nothing. The thing stopped. It tilted its head again, that smooth expanse where a face should be turning toward me like a flower following the sun. The gash mouth opened and my voice came out, laced with a questioning tremor.
"Hello?"
I didn't move. I didn't speak. I was a statue. I was empty. I was the void it couldn't fill. It took a step closer. Its smell overwhelming. It was so close, I could see the fine crack in its bone-white skin. the way the black sap oozed from the pores around its mouth. It raised one of its long-fingered hands and reached for my face. I flinched internally, but held my ground, my eyes still fixed on the distance. The fingers stopped just an inch from my cheek. They were cold, radiating a deep, unnatural chill. It was confused. I was not behaving according to the script it had learned. There was no fear sound, no anger sound, no pleading. There was just nothingness. A hollow it couldn't fill because there was nothing there to fill. It made that low, clicking sound again, this time with a note of frustration. It leaned in, its faceless head hovering next to mine. The gash mouth opened wide, revealing rows of small, needle-sharp teeth, and it tried one last thing. It emitted a soft, perfect whimper, Gus's whimper. The sound he'd made the day I found him as a stray pup, hungry and scared and alone. It was the most heartbreaking sound I had ever heard. Every fiber of my being screamed to respond, to call his name, to reach out, but I didn't. I held onto the emptiness inside me like a lifeline. I was a void. I was nothing. The creature recoiled as if struck. It let out a shriek that was a mosaic of every sound it had ever collected. A bear's roar, Hemlock's rattling cough, my own shout, the screech of a hawk, Gus's bark, a dozen voices I didn't recognize, all layered into a single, discordant wail of rage and confusion. It couldn't stand my emptiness. It turned and flowed away from me, melting into the deeper shadows of the grove, its form blurring until it was gone. The quiet returned, heavier than ever. I didn't wait to see if it would come back. I ran. I crashed through the tree line, not stopping until I was back on my porch, heaving lungfuls of clean, cold air. I survived, but I'm not the same. The grove is still there. I see it from my window. A wound on the land that seems to pulse with its own malevolent life. I don't go near it. The corruption is spreading, slowly but steadily. Dead patches of grass reaching like fingers toward my house. Sometimes, at night, I hear things. A voice calling my name. The sound of a whetstone. A dog whining. But now, I hear another sound too. One I never heard before that day in the grove. A low, frustrated clicking coming from just beyond the tree line. It's learning new sounds, adding them to its collection. It's patient. And sometimes, when the wind is right, I smell that sweet, coppery rot getting stronger. It's getting closer, claiming more ground each day. I sit in my silent house, my own hollow, and I wait. I know it can't stand emptiness, but I also know that eventually, even the deepest void finds something to fill it. And when that happens, I'll have nothing left to give but myself. The thing in the maple grove is still learning. I'm leaving tonight, torching this cabin and everything in it. But when I step outside, the silence follows me like a shadow. Maybe I escaped, or maybe I just carried the hollow with me.
The end.
It seems like it's always the far out forest places where creatures keep getting away with murder. What's up with that? I wouldn't be surprised if the hollow one was an SCP. If not, the Foundation needs to look into this. Having a meat-carving, tree-sucking twig thing loose in the middle of nowhere sounds like a good way to have a bad time. I honestly thought this story would take a Wendigo or Skinwalker route, but it's nice to read about a new creature that will now haunt my dreams. I'm so happy there's another long video on my channel, this one being just a few minutes longer than my previous longest video on my channel. I love stories like this where they have more time to build the world out. And I can tell you guys like the longer stories too. I'm always on the lookout for longer stories on this channel, and I'm so excited for the next one. It'll be different from previous stories, but that's what makes it awesome. Thank you to NoShallet3746 for letting me read your story. The link to their story on Reddit can be found in the description. Don't forget to like the video if you liked it, or dislike it if you didn't. I upload once a week, every week, so if you like listening to scary short stories, and you don't hate my voice, consider subscribing so you won't miss out on future videos. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you next Saturday. Bye bye bye.